We are talking Bright, the new Netflix original movie directed by David Ayer from Suicide Squad and written by Max Landis that stars Will Smith and Joel Edgerton, and it's essentially a cop genre set in a kind of world where fantasy creatures have been living side by side with us throughout history, and really tells the story of two cops as they basically uncover a magic wand which is essentially a weapon of mass destruction. But we're going to be talking about the movie, and I'll give my review on it, but I also kind of want to rope in something else. And I'm going to put in my tinfoil hat and have a little bit of a conspiracy theory as well. And this is purely speculation of my own part, and that is that this movie has been massively panned by critics, and I think this movie is getting so much heat to cover up for Star Wars, and I'll explain why I think that in just a minute. We will be talking about the movie itself. The movie isn't perfect. I did like it to a point, but it does have some problems. But I kind of want to just go through kind of a theory, maybe why this movie is picking up so much flack, first of all. So as you know, Star Wars came out and the critics were loving it for the most part. It was a very high kind of critic rating. When audiences got to see it, it was very divided. Now, not every audience member hated it, not every audience member loved it. But the general feeling is that older Star Wars fans, my age and kind of around that sort of time, wasn't really happy with it, and there was a lot of pushback on the kind of the franchise, and it has been building since The Force Awakens, I feel, and there's been a kind of a lot of talk about why is the kind of the critics rating so high, but the kind of the audience rating so low, and we've had critics saying, oh, it's because the you know, it's rigged, there's been trolls on it, and we've had some critics in particular, for example, John Campier, who gave it an absolutely glowing review, and there's been constantly talking then since about, you know, oh, there's all this kind of backlash and it's all fake and etc, etc. Almost to kind of backtrack and kind of really underscore his positive review. And I've got to say, some of these kind of reviewers, there's all talk of were they kind of paid off, and I don't think they were physically paid off with money, but they certainly were schmoozed. I mean, they've got invited to the premiere, got to rub shoulders with the kind of the you know, all the kind of the cast and crew and all of that. And then these guys are obviously giving these very kind of positive reviews before all the audience kind of reaction hits, and you know, and they're really getting out the flack saying, are they paid off? And what is this tying to Bright? Well, Bright is really the next kind of like a big kind of like genre movie that's kind of came out, and obviously we've had like a couple of films come out in the cinema, but this is really another genre film that will probably appeal to the kind of the older demographic, the older kind of Star Wars fans. I feel it's kind of a you know, a similar, you know, audience member, and also because it's on Netflix, I feel it's a little bit of an easier target. But not only that, you have to remember this movie was written by Max Landis, who was one of the key people in the when The Force Awakens came out, that really kind of made people aware of the kind of the Mary Sue-ness of the Rey character. And the term Mary Sue has been around for a while, but Max Landis was the person who really kind of demonstrated some of the faults and really kind of got some traction to really critiquing The Force Awakens. And I feel this is a little bit of payback, and also kind of reviewers trying to kind of double down on their kind of positive review by trying to shift focus onto Bright by saying, oh no, this is a really bad movie, because negative headlines drive feedback, unfortunately. It's just the way it is, and I feel that people are trying to move the focus away from this kind of controversy with Star Wars, and the fact that, you know, so many reviewers have given it such a positive review, and it's clearly that a good portion of the audience weren't happy with it. I know some were, so I'm not saying that you shouldn't like it if you like it, but you know, it's the fact that it's a divisive film, and they're trying to kind of shift the focus onto this kind of new narrative by really being overly negative on this movie, and I think it's because it's a kind of a similar genre film coming out at the same sort of time, written by Max Landis, who's one of the key people in the kind of negativity that started happening with The Force Awakens. And because it's not a cinema movie, they don't have to worry too much about pissing off the studios. They want to schmooze, they want to kind of want the interviews, they want to get to the red carpet events. They kind of maybe not get paid off exactly, but I do think they sometimes give overly positive maybe, and kind of are a bit political, shall we say, in regards to their kind of reviews. And I've got to be honest, if I see someone who's got invited to a red carpet event, to the premiere, I'll be honest, I'm kind of going to be less likely to really trust their reviews. There's certain reviews channels and sites that I do trust, but there are ones now that I feel are a little bit kind of maybe bought and paid for, so to a certain degree. I'm not saying they are physically exchanging money, and they're quite right in saying I've never taken a penny from Disney, and I don't believe that's the case, but I felt that there's maybe their back scratched in other ways. With that being said, I think that's kind of why maybe the focus has tried to be shifted onto Bright, because although this movie does have its issues, and we'll kind of go through my thoughts on it now, I personally think this is why this is happening to a degree. Now, I'd love to hear someone else's opinion. Am I being crazy? Like I said, this is my own speculation. I'm not saying this is the thing, but I can't help but feel it just seems a little bit fishy to me. I'd love to hear your opinion on my conspiracy theory. So what do we think about Bright themselves? Well, let's go through the negatives first of all, because this like I said, this movie doesn't have its, it's not a kind of a slam dunk by any means. I think, for me, the main issues with this film is it kind of starts off in a funny place. So you kind of go really cold with this movie. You kind of just go in and it's the world isn't kind of set up. The partnership between Will Smith and Joel Edgerton's character, you're just going in cold. I felt like the movie kind of needed to kind of maybe ease you into it a little bit. And these guys are already partners. They're already kind of on the job when we kind of first meet them, and we kind of we're accepting this world like that. So that's I think the first issue with this film. It takes you in a kind of a somewhat of a cold open, and I feel it takes a while to warm up and get to warm up to this world and the characters. I was also surprised with the tone of this film. It's surprisingly kind of negative in a way. The tone of this movie is quite kind of gritty. It's very much like End of Watch, which is also like a David Ayer film. It does feel a kind of like, it's not, even though we have magical creatures, it's really kind of like a very kind of demilitarized type environment, which is interesting, but again, it's a kind of a little bit of a negative feel to it. And the story really is a kind of very clumsy analogy of obviously race and how we kind of perceive maybe racism, and we just translate it to a kind of fantasy setting to kind of emphasise it. So it's I feel it's a little bit ham-fisted with some of those kind of like the mirroring of what's happening in this compared to obviously our kind of real world. I've got to say though, I thought Will Smith and Joel Edgerton were great. It takes a while for their chemistry to get going. I would have liked to have maybe seen to them to kind of really start bonding a little earlier, if I'm honest, because I feel it was kind of a little bit late. But nonetheless, I thought that was great. And I did like the look of the orcs, the look of the this kind of world. I mean, we do see little hints of other races like centaurs and kind of dragons and stuff here and there. I really love the elves. The elves in this movie are great. They kind of almost are like vampires. They look fantastic. They're essentially like sort of badass ninjas. I thought they were fantastic. There's some great action sequences and really kind of quite brutal. I was surprised how much adult content is in this movie in regards to kind of swearing and kind of like violence and kind of murder and stuff like that. It's more adult than I thought it was going to be. But it's just an odd tone. But I think it's it's an enjoyable movie, but it does seem a little bit not made for cinema release. When we kind of watching it, we don't really see any kind of really turning too fantastic. It almost does seem like a TV movie or a TV series, and I feel this maybe would have worked better as a kind of a higher budget series, where we have chance to kind of flesh out this world. I mean, you might not be able to have Will Smith in it, but I don't know. I think more time and kind of introducing into this world and kind of its inhabitants and, you know, the history of what's happened and stuff would have suited this a bit better. Because I just feel it kind of dumps this bit of exposition on you. You don't really get a chance to kind of soak it in. But overall, I've got to say, I still enjoyed it. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the kind of the aesthetics of these kind of, the look of these kind of races. And when we get down to it, and as the movie progresses, we do start to get kind of like some good characterization and you know, you kind of buy into the kind of the relationship a little bit more. So I've got to say, I still enjoyed this movie, although it's very similar to David Ayer's stuff. It definitely has that kind of that same aesthetic, but it's, you know, it's a pretty decent movie. I don't think it deserves the tag of the worst movie of 2017. And like I've said, I think it's getting kind of like lambasted unfairly because people are trying to shift attention from their reviews of Star Wars and stop them getting crap saying they were bought off and stuff. That's what I think is happening. Anyway, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.